of a particular set of persons or nation. It can also, the motivations can also be political in nature. It can also be from a religious point of view, it can be from a cultural point of view, and it can be from a moral point of view. And so sometimes we have to balance it and look at what are the roots.
As a writer myself, I feel it's wrong that the work that I have taken the time to put together because I want to make a contribution to a collective narrative, just because somebody didn't like it, that work is taken out of circulation, is not allowing people to consume it. I think it is not fair enough to the people, to the writer out there.
But the book business in itself is hard, and ensuring that people actually care about the content that's getting out there, which is a whole nother story about, pushing reading within our community. But then aside from having the African bookstores, I think that it's important to build our own institutions, especially when it comes to schools. So I'm in curricula development. So I build out curriculums for people, for young kids that look like me.
Hello and thank you for checking out this video. I'm Obehi Ewanfoh, the host of the African Diaspora Storytelling Series. Every 2 weeks we meet up on LinkedIn to talk about different ways we can leverage the power of storytelling as people of African descent. Now this is it. We are uniting the millions of Africans in the diaspora through the power of our story. It does sound like what you are interested in. Make sure to subscribe to this channel and share this video with your friends who might need it. Now, back to today's conversation. I think the conversation of the day is really important for me. When I first got notice of it was a couple of weeks ago, actually, because then I was trying to look for books that I could recommend for the community. And then I was reading some article. That was when it got to my attention that a lot of books will actually be banned. Books that are written by African diaspora writer, African American writer, most in this case. So I was sort of surprised because I never thought that was this rampant. And also because the book that were being referred to as being banned, I don't even saw a book that should not be popular. These are very popular books, like The Color Purpose, the book by Toni Morrison, like The Bluest Eyes. These are very important books that sort of have important message also to the community. Why are books like this banned? So I really dig on that. So I published an article on it. So I think as a writer myself and as a person who speaks on about the African diaspora community, I think arguments like this should really be important for us in that when a situation like this happens, when they ban our books, or ban the type of book that give us the time to be able to share our experiences and how we see the world, our worldview, we share it, and the government are banning it. What are we supposed to do in that? So that is actually where this conversation was stemming from. That I'm even curious myself. I don't know what is actually the solution to the situation. In that we are living in a free society, and I want to believe that they call it a free society. So everybody should be allowed to express their viewpoint. And in this case, now putting it in books. But if those books are being banned from school, how free are we in that sense? So I don't know what is going to be your take there.
Good morning. I'm happy to be here. I'm Dr. Marcia Thomas, a Christian leadership consultant and life coach. I help faith-based introverted female leaders to overcome life traumas and pivot with power by hearing their stories. I also write children's stories, and I have recently published a book in which I talk and share my story as a Christian leader and provide coaching strategies and steps that people can take to harness their superpower as a Christian leader in a professional space. I particularly think this conversation is relevant and very pertinent for all persons who are writers like myself or even authors. And in the context of the African diaspora, I think it is a serious concern because it not only restricts freedom of expression, but it also hinders access to diverse perspectives that can help persons to improve their lives, to get knowledge, and to actually change the paradigm and the script. Because these writers, these authors, speak from a unique perspective that is very important. We maybe have to understand the motivations behind banning these books because they can vary very widely and they often reflect underlying intentions related to the empowerment of a particular set of persons or nation. It can also, the motivations can also be political in nature. It can also be from a religious point of view, it can be from a cultural point of view, and it can be from a moral point of view. And so sometimes we have to balance it and look at what are the roots that are the foundation of these attempts to control this information, to shape the public discourse, or to enforce particular perspectives or norms. And so, from that perspective, if we are to balance this discussion, we want to look at it from those angles. And we also want to look at the implications for these authors and these writers and the audience that will benefit from what they are sharing.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Marcia. I think this is really an important conversation. It's also important that we try to balance up the conversation, like you said. But it is fundamentally important for us as a people that more of our content are out there, particularly within the area of education, because if we don't put enough content for people to be able to say balance it also on their side, balance the perspective, it's going to be difficult for them to be able to come up with what can be a holistic approach to what is actually happening in the world or shaping their own world view. Because it is not always right to see it from one point of view. There are multiple points of view. I remember now, for example, when I was doing my research about the African presence in northern Italy. In the second phase of the research, which I titled "The Color of Our Children," of course, they have to do with the discrimination of African children in Italian school. So in that project, I have to interview a lot of people, teachers, school directors, parents, and even the students themselves. I remember one time I was interviewing a secondary school teacher in Verona, which is the city where I live. And she was saying something to the effect that there is this strong tendency of pushing the Eurocentric point of view in the mind of the people. Of course, it doesn't matter to them whether the people they are finding in school are people of European descent or not. The agenda of the educational system is to make sure that everybody corresponds to one way of seeing reality. Of course, that doesn't make it's not a problem for them if you are a European descent, because it means that your agenda is being pushed. But what if that is not who you are? What if maybe, for example, your parents are Arabs or your parents are African, and maybe the agenda that is being pushed now is a European agenda and it doesn't reflect you? Does it have any way of affecting how you see yourself in the world?
My take is, and in an effort to be balanced, we want to talk about those persons who are Africans of African origin who were never born in Africa. Their parents migrated very early and became a part of the Western society. And so these children grew up with a second-hand knowledge of their true origin and roots. And so as they move along and they maybe get their hand on the literature because their parents might be persons who, in an effort to resonate with their roots and so on, have these books and have certain cultures and practices as it relates to eating and so in their homes and modes of dress, you might find that they become very conservative in their views and their approach instead of being traditional. And so they might be among the group who advocate for books to be banned because they find the things presented as very objectionable or disturb their how they are now, their state of mind, their comfort zone, because these things bring things into their purview, into their spirits, into their minds that truly exist and are worthy to be mentioned, but what they find very objectionable and offensive because they are in a nice little cocoon or comfort zone that was created by their parents who have left their land of origin for so long that they themselves have become sensitized to wanting to live in this bubble that they have created for themselves. I find that if we're to balance it, we have to account any discussion that talks about these books have to account for those groups because they do exist and those conservative perspective because they do exist. Now, some of these books are also banned by persons who are not intentionally divisive, or averse to the literature, but because they think that it will create some public disturbance and some response. And so it might be that they want to prevent public outcry or an uprising because of the truth. And we see that whenever there is movies that in February, which is usually celebrated as Black History Month, there are a lot of memories or evoking of emotions that a lot of persons would have maybe put in recess that comes back to the surface. And so they are banning some of these movies also, along with some of these books. And one of these movies is Roots. A lot of persons feel are becoming very cautious now with that film. And it is simply because sometimes it is very hard to face the real truth and to dig below the surface and to understand how persons are affected by their experiences and by the injustices and abuse that they have encountered, whether mentally or emotionally, and by the microaggression that is meted out to persons of certain descent or nationality. And so government authorities might find themselves banning books because they perceive them as threatening their authority, their ideology, or certain types of security, maybe environmental security, in the sense that persons might respond in a particular way because books by themselves, films by themselves, conversations by themselves are very dynamic, and you cannot control the type of emotions that they evoke in other people. But regardless of that, we must understand that we must continue to advocate for change, whether personal, professional, career, environmental, societal, or national change, because it is very important. Change, growth, development, and knowledge is very important. And we must also have that side that provoke or challenge certain dogmas that are out there, and we must be able to have alternative interpretations and texts that promote human rights and promote freedom of thought, freedom of speech, freedom of action. And we must regulate our story in such a way that it carries out its intended purposes and goals, which really, of a fact, is to enlighten, and it's really to promote understanding and authenticity and having us live and carry out our stories through the lens of our original and unique being and the unique gifts and talents that we bring to the table. And so we must advocate and do something about the banning of these books, regardless of whatever reason that persons feel that they would want to have. And we cannot control the perceptions or reasonings of persons and their rationale for banning these books. But in an attempt to collaborate, in a collaborative understanding, we accept their perspectives, we listen to what they're saying, and we protect our rights and our books. And so, if they are banned in a particular zone or in a particular environment or dispensation, we must promote and have persons publishing these books or getting them outside of the jurisdiction where the ban is enforced. And we must also publish and distribute the banned books intentionally, purposefully, and strategically, because we must get it in the hands of those who we want to have it. And so, with the rise of self publishing platforms and print on demand services, we as authors must have very much more options, and we are to utilize these options, and we are to train ourselves to do it ourselves and to get the censorship and the rights that we need to have our what would we say now, our work recognized and highlighted in the ways that we want. Then we must also have and create digital archives, in my mind, where banned books can be archived but can also be distributed, whether it's electronically or through physical copies. We must source the various sources, and we must ensure that they are preserved and that they become accessible. What am I really saying? When our duty and our calling is to protect our homes, the same way we protect our families, our homes, and ourselves and our possessions, is the very same way and very same approach we must take in protecting our literature and our books, because our children need to hear their true stories. Because if they don't know where they're coming from, they really will not know where they're going. They will be lost. They will be fumbling in the dark. They will be taking the information from other persons. And so we must do that. We can also legally challenge the avenues that seek to ban the books, whether domestically or otherwise, because we have freedom of expression and we have certain constitutional protections, and we must seek those assistance, and we must research those, and we must become very aware, and we must become very active in doing that. We must also integrate discussions about censorship and what is the implications for that in relations to how we navigate our own libraries. We must now have resources and resource centers for ourselves in any area that we go, and we must have persons with the means and the funds who take that initiative, because private enterprises are have certain protections and liabilities that are put on them that can prevent persons from banning content that they put out. And we can also have public awareness campaigns so that persons become very informed about these banned books and the reasons behind the censorship. We can use social media, we can use traditional media, and we can use community events to put this in the forefront and to have those books out there. We must also create international avenues for our books to be seen and heard, and this includes private spaces. Private spaces does not necessarily have to be your home. We have spaces that persons are using in their film and so on to do those things. So one of the ways that we can actively present these books are in films. We take the content and we have it, and we make them source the books. in our schools, we also, because we draft our own curriculum to a large extent, and whether we match it internationally with persons, our international counterparts in our schools, they use the books that they feel will tell their story and will empower their people and will highlight the message or the themes that they have in these curriculums. And for lifelong learning, we can do the very same thing. We can sit down intentionally, objectively, and purposefully and strategically and unapologetically select those books that will carry the message in certain courses and will empower persons and make them think, solve problems, and also make them agile so they fit into a world that is not as pleasant and comfortable as we want, and navigate their challenges and their obstacles and come out wiser, stronger, and more powerful. And they each one now can teach one. And those who come behind us will also find us faithful and find sources of strength and empowerment through the efforts that we make to preserve what is rightfully ours. I know I've gone on a long time, but it's very important that we understand that we are not to have our hands down. We are to stay informed and vigilant. We must create the events and these resources that people can use. We must advocate and we must have those initiatives that support the alternative distribution of these books.
That is really very important. It's really very important because as a writer myself, I feel it's wrong that the work that I have taken the time to put together because I want to make a contribution to a collective narrative, just because somebody didn't like it, that work is taken out of circulation, is not allow people to consume it. I think it is not fair enough to the people, to the writer out there. Also because it's discouraging to writers because already people don't even want to write. For the fact that we are telling them, hey, write, somebody maybe get encouraged and is writing. Now he know that his work or her work is not going to be accepted. It's not really encouraging that much. Of course, I understand that if you are the one that is already self-motivated, like me, for example, it's not that I'm really going to be discouraged for writing. That is never going to happen because I just do it. My energy is not coming from whether you accept it or not. But of course, everybody is not like me. So I think it is, as a minimum, this ban should not be put out there discouraging people from writing. Okay, I also understand that it is not one-way direction. It's not only the books that are written by African descent that are banned in the West. There are other books that are also banned. I understand that. But because we are more like a kind of a minority in any society that we find ourselves, whether we are in Italy or maybe we are in Canada or maybe we are in the US, put against the mainstream, we are a minority there. So because we are a minority and a larger proportion of our people have not written content, which means there are deficits of written content by African and about African in the Western society. So this deficit cannot also be encouraged by taking out the few books that are available there, particularly when they are written by people who we respect a lot, like Maya Angelou or Toni Morrison, who have taken the time to explain themselves. Because one thing I've also discovered in the course of my research is that one thing is to be part of the African diaspora, in that you have left your home, you now find yourself in another person's land, in this case, maybe in Europe or in the Euro-Western society. That doesn't mean that you are able to explain your experience. Many people are not able to explain their experiences. So their thought, their living experiences is going to die with them by the time they die. But there are a few who are able to see that I have, because to think is very important. Yes, thinking is hard. But if you know how to think, you see that it is really good thing for you to do because you give your mind the ability to work. But many people, a larger proportion of our population don't want to do that work. So a lot of people are not writing. I remember, for example, during the course of my research, I was interviewing a writer. He's coming from Eritrea, and he's been living here for more than 40 years as of the time that I interviewed him. I interviewed him years ago. So he was telling me that there are some people that he met that are not able to explain what have happened to them. And that is a shortage to the community. So what I'm essentially saying is that it would have been good that we continue to encourage ourselves the more to read especially our experiences, so that we know where we are coming from, what our experiences have been. Because essentially it boils down to that, that after you have passed through a tunnel, at the end of the day, you find the light. You pull down this step, what happened to you in that tunnel? Because in the tunnel, there is no light, it's dark. The difference between when you enter the tunnel and when you came out of the tunnel, you owed in almost like an obligation. If you are able to think, if you are the type who are able to analyze what has happened to you, if you are not just living in the bubble, because a great percentage of our population are just living in the bubble. So if you are that individual who is able to explain what have happened to you in the tunnel, when other people like you are coming, they are entering into the tunnel, they enter with the knowledge of what is in the tunnel. So they're going to navigate it differently than when they enter without a prior knowledge of what they can come, what can happen. Because when you don't know that, you think that is the end of the world. So it is important for us, particularly people of African descent and those of us that find ourselves in the diaspora, to write down our experiences, because it helps other people to find their way around easier compared to when they don't have any trace. It means that you look like the first one. We cannot always be the first one all the time. So I think this is why it is important that our books should not be banned. Also, by the time our books are removed from circulation or are removed from the academic circle, that is actually where we are targeting more. We are hoping that most of our books should actually be in the academic circle, because that is where the debate is taking place. That is where the information are going into the minds of the children. If they don't have this alternative narrative, because you cannot talk about what you don't know. You cannot talk about what you are not exposed to. You see, I say this quite often, that at a point, a person here, a child, okay, not only a child, an adult, an adolescent of about like 19 years old, born of an African parent, both parents have told me here in Italy, in Verona where I live, that Africans have no history. That if Africans have history, I should prove it. You see, that might sound to you to be okay, where it's just said by a child. Not only a child, somebody of 19 years old cannot be called a child. Now, that individual is saying that because he was born here, he lived all his life here. He was not exposed to the fact that Africa is actually filled up of history. Because you cannot say what you don't know. That is why I think it is important that we, like Dr. Mattia had said, we need to look for other ways to make sure that this information gets to the right sources. Right now, we are recording this room. We want to make sure that when we finish, we make it available so that the few people that are here, plus the few people that are going to see it outside, more people will be reached. We are doing this intentionally. And we are also making sure that when somebody takes time to write, that book is read, that book is distributed, that book is accessible, because that book contains information. It contains information that is going to help somebody who is going to be here. Maybe when we are gone, the person will take up this book and read, and it's going to help that individual. So it is important that we do this. Now, I have a question for you, Dr. Matsia. You see, I was saying that for me, I feel bad that after I've taken the time to put down my work, that work will not be in circulation. I'm talking of African Diaspora author. So you as an author, how do you feel?
I feel that it is a great injustice when authors' books are banned. especially from unique cultures or minority groups. And I, for those who are in the discussion, we understand the terms that we are now using because we are using it in the context of this discussion. And simply because it is not only an injustice, but it is a serious concern for me because, as I said before, it restricts the freedom of expression. And persons live life as it is and not how they want it to be. And persons need to hear the stories of perseverance, of resilience, of understanding, of becoming, of growth, and of failures and mistakes, and how persons bounce back in their context and in their experience as persons who have left their culture, as persons who remain in their culture, as persons who are immersed in another culture and has come to a crossroad where they either have to adopt or let go some of what they value. These are some of the things that are in these books and how they navigate their own cultures and traditional offerings that they might find have changed or no longer serves its purpose or needs to be adjusted or altered or adopted to fit into the current circumstance or situation. And so that freedom of expression is not is suppressed when these books are banned. There is also a restriction or an obstacle or hindrance now to the diverse perspectives that are out there because no one knows everything. And you and I can be in the same conference, hearing the same thing, but how it affects you is very different. And so there are persons who are in the African diaspora who are in the same exact situation or similar, and they are interpreting and navigating it differently. And those diverse perspectives are very valid and very pertinent for persons who have no voice and for persons who are going through similar situations. When we prevent that from happening, we limit the awareness, we limit the extent to which persons can feel that they are not alone. We limit the extent to which there is shared knowledge and experiences. We limit the opportunities for meaningful connections and applications. And we diminish, dismiss, or undervalue the emotions and feelings and experiences and thoughts of persons that are very important for those who are coming behind. And so, in that regard, those are serious concerns that we and issues and implications that we cannot ignore. And if we continue to ignore those types of enemies to solidarity and empowerment of the African diaspora, then we begin to hide our history, or we begin to promote this idea that we should be ashamed of who we are. And we are hanging our heads and under the sun, and we are allowing and permitting persons to advocate for us who do not know us. And so we find that very soon we will be giving shoes to people who have no feet, because these reproductions of our thoughts and experiences and our unique and authentic selves have not been promoted enough and has not been resonating enough. So its impact and the impression is very pale or very faint, that we ourselves outside of our jurisdiction and outside of our environment and outside of our country find it difficult ourselves to embrace what we have ignored so long that we are no longer able to clearly remember. That's a dangerous position for any person to find themselves in. We have to know who we are. We have to accept who we are. We have to love who we are so that we can show up unapologetically in the right position and in our superpower. So everywhere we go, we are our best selves. How can we? One of the ways that I did not mention that we can stay informed is that we need to support alternate distributions. If it is that these books are banned in the mainstream or in certain locations, then we must consider supporting the alternate distribution channels and centers that these books are in. And these include independent bookstores that belong to persons from the diaspora, certain online platforms because of the movement and the opportunity people have to be free and to do their e-commerce, and also the international organizations that promote literary freedom. We tend to have a tendency, we tend to have this disposition where we find it very difficult to support each other. I find that there are certain nations and certain cultures who, even if they are enemies, they support one another. They build their business near to one another, and they make sure that the businesses are different and varied, and that it meets the needs of their corporate and collective community. And persons hardly support outside of that community because they find everything that they need inside of those communities. And these persons migrate to different countries and do the very same thing. I find that one of the things that we lack in the African diaspora is the collective support.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. I really do. I really do. Because those voices are important. They're important to live so that other people can tap into it. You see, I think in one of our audio room, somebody was saying something to the effect that the way that our education is organized is done in such a way that we are given a book to read. By the time we finish to read this book, we would have grown up. And by the time we look at our life, we will be ashamed of who we are or whom we have become. And who we have become now is through the funnel of education. So I think this is what our contribution into the narrative is supposed to correct. So that when people of African descent are writing, they are obviously writing from their point of view. And if in a free society like Western society, European country, or the United States are repressing that alternative narrative or this idea of African to express themselves, it means they don't want us to share our view. They want us to fit into that narrative where we will grow up and be ashamed of who we are. And then some other person will say, but how did that happen? Of course, it happened intentionally. It happened intentionally. And like Dr. Martial is telling us, we need to make sure that that doesn't continue. But that doesn't continue. It's going to be based on our effort, that we deliberately share our knowledge. We deliberately fashion places where we can meet and talk, not just to drink beer and eat rice, but we can talk about ourselves, our senses and sensibility, our fear, our dream, our hope, all of them. We should not look at these through the lenses of other people, but through our own lenses, through our perspective as people. This is important for us, so that the banning of our book should not also ban us from reproducing the same books. They may have rejected the book from the mainstream, but we should not follow that same narrative that this book is rejected and therefore I should not have it on my library in the house. So we need to encourage those individuals who are still writing despite of. So I want to pass the mic to Nakasha. Nakasha, thank you so much for joining us. You know the drill, you know the conversation. We're talking about banning books of African diaspora author. What should we do?
Hi everyone. Sorry for not being here the full time. I'm sure it has been a fruitful conversation. My name is Nakaja. I'm an author and business owner. My book is Play the Game, Hierarchical Simulation. I've also written two children's books as well. Um, yeah, I think it's a really important conversation to have. I think the biggest thing that being in the book business, which I'm sure most of us on this call are in the book business. It's really difficult because a lot of people in this day and age don't value knowledge and don't value books as much as we did previously. So it doesn't give as much attention. And like for example, one book that was banned, which I'm not sure if you guys are familiar, is The Souls of Black Folk by W.E.B. Du Bois. That was a book that was banned at one point. And I had the chance of reading it when I was in middle school, which I'm sure, that was because I was at an obscure middle school that was very like Pan-African and a lot of their ideas and curricula, but that would be banned now or seen as very and there was even a lot of backlash back then in like 2020, I guess it was like 2012, 2013, when they had that type of curricula. But especially in this day and age, that having that types of books that are available, even reading like slave narratives, Aludu Iqueno, for example, Beloved by Toni Morrison, and so many different things. And I think the biggest thing that we can do is trying to build our own communities and institutions that push for our own books and infrastructure and communities. Essentially, we need more Black owned bookstores or African owned bookstores that carry that type of material. Luckily, I live near Sankofa, and there's a few Sankofas in the DMV area, but they particularly center around capturing African books for African people. But the book business in itself is hard, and ensuring that people actually care about the content that's getting out there, which is a whole nother story about, pushing reading within our community. But then aside from having the African bookstores, I think that it's important to build our own institutions, especially when it comes to schools. So I'm in like curricula development. So I build out curriculums for people, for young kids that look like me. Um, as far as like African within the African diaspora, also, in the Latin next community, if you want to say that. So I just think that it's important for us to just continue to build and, utilize that material, utilize that uh, all of our ancestors, and not even just our ancestors, but the people around us, our network that we have, to continue to ensure that we're pouring into our young people, but pouring into each other. Right now, I feel like we rely too heavily on other people's systems, and particularly systems of like oppressors, and we think that we can get far with that, but we really can't. And so the main thing that we have to do is continuously building those schools, create a book club, right? Like read some of those books and discuss like why were they banned, or support like your local authors and figure out what they're writing about and why it's important and how it relates, and then look into like what they're referencing. Like it's just important for us to provoke intellectual inquiry and thought within our community so we can actually get somewhere. It's not about just reading a book, it's about the power of the book to build. So that's what I would say.
Thank you so much for that. It's not just the book, it's the power of the book in the sense of what we do with the book. No? That is like say, it's not just about the story, it's what we do with the story. Because within the story, to be able to create the narrative, the story and the narrative are not exactly the same. I think I took some time to explain this in the 5-part book series, that you have the story, then you have the narrative. Yeah, it is important that we take the time to share this moment, to explain to each other, to sort of occupy each other's space, and to make sure that this is available even when we are not right now together here. It can be maybe tomorrow, the day after tomorrow. This recording is still available, but in the form of books. The feeling that we're having in our head is still available in the form of books, and that those books are not just for the sake of being books, but that we actually use it, that we read it, and we share the information that is contained in those books. You see, when you go into those conversations around the industry of motivational industry, they will tell you that one book can actually change your life. And that is literally true. You see, there are marriages that are broken today that reading one book could have saved that marriage. What do I mean? It's like the example I was saying before, that if maybe, for example, somebody have passed through the tunnel and he wrote down how he or she have passed through the tunnel in a book, and somebody is either entering the tunnel or have somewhere in the middle of the tunnel, he doesn't know what is going to be the end of it. So if you allow this individual, if we expose this individual to the narrative, the experiences of a person before, then that individual is going to be able to navigate the tunnel differently. Unlike when you don't have those information. So it is good that we take the time to pull down this story. I think I've said it a number of times, that it is important for us. And it's also important that we conserve them. We guide them jealously so that we are doing this for the people that are going to be here. This is fundamentally important. It is absolutely important.
I want to end by saying that we have to, divided we fall and united we stand. And so as a group of persons, we need to unite to get these stories out, to appreciate persons, to find what they're doing, what they're producing, and to commit ourselves to supporting whatever message or theme needs to go out there, or reviewing, or supporting, or expanding the conversation, because sometimes persons write from a particular perspective, but we can add. So someone can write about a particular experience, and we can add our side to that in our writing, and that's part of the ways of keeping the message going from different angles that does not
Right. I think that advance you're having some challenges there. Okay, it's okay. Uh, uh, I think we got the message that Dr. Marcia was sharing there. And it actually made me think back to what Morrison was saying in her work one time, that we need to pay attention to the ordinary. The story is happening all around us. The experiences is all around us. So we need to pay attention to those ordinary experiences, because very soon they will become extraordinary. That people don't pay attention to that ordinary. It is actually that ordinary that becomes the extraordinary when we have treated them. It is important that we keep memory of our past, because it helps us to forge a better future. That is what books are for. And of course, within the context of the African diaspora and the Euro-Western society, it is important that those narratives are brought into the mainstream. They are brought into the conversation, the everyday conversation, so that people can understand how these people feel. I mean, I live in Italy. I hope that the Italian person is interested in learning how I feel too, because I am interested in how he or she feels as an Italian, because I'm living in their land. But because I'm living in their land, I am occupying a space. It is important that somebody should also be interested in how am I managing that space. It's not just enough to say, okay, you are occupying seat 1, you are occupying seat 2, as if we are just simply numbers. No, we are not just simply numbers. We are carrying heritage, we are carrying language, we are carrying culture. By taking the time to understand also how I feel, maybe this society will be a better place. Because if you don't know how I feel, you might keep repeating the same behavior that is probably hurting me. And as it hurt me, it transfers back to you. So we are actually hurting each other at the end of the day. You see, James Allen, in his book, says something that I think it is very important for many people to reflect on, that both the slave and the slaveholder are tied by one chain. Because You don't want the slave to be free. Therefore, you tie one chain to his leg. But where do you tie the other end of the chain? You need to tie it on your own leg. With me, that the slave is not free, but you are also not free. For you to be free, you need to set the slave free. That is sort of the basic arithmetic of life, that we are coexisting, we are living in this space together. Let us live in this space together, in the sense that I sometimes listen to you, but sometimes you also need to listen to me.